and a member of the House Intelligence Committee. And Ken Delaney is a reporter with NBC's investigative unit. I want to start with Ken, our guy here. The subject of investigation, explain the law on that. Michael Flynn, the younger, now involved in what? Why is he joining this mess?
Well, Chris, the subject of the investigation means that prosecutors or the grand jury suspect you may have committed a crime, but they need more information to find out. So it's more serious than being a witness, but not as serious as being a target, which means you're about to be indicted. Now, we know that Mike Flynn, the father, appears to be facing serious legal jeopardy over his failure to disclose his lobbying for the government of Turkey and his various business entanglements, failing to declare things on his security clearance application. And Mike Flynn, the son, was like his father's right-hand man. He was his executive assistant. He was his chief of staff. He was involved in all these dealings. He was involved perhaps in filling out forms. So that may explain the special counsel's interest in him. Of course, there's also the issue of leverage. If the theory goes that Robert Mueller wants to flip Mike Flynn, the father, and get him to talk about what he knows about Russian collusion, you know, investigating his son and looking at potential crimes by his son is another way to put pressure on Mike Flynn, the former national security advisor.
Well, in terms of a criminal, the way they do a criminal case, tell me that, how it works. They start, as I understand it, from outside the ring and work their way in closer. You start with the small fry, who may be vulnerable on particular charges that may not even relate to Trump. You squeeze them on those charges. Say you want to go away for 20 years, maybe we'll go away for 2 or 3 months or 2 or 3 years if you tell us what you did with Trump. Am I right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You've got it exactly right. And especially we're talking about a counterintelligence investigation here, allegations of a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia, which would be really hard to prove, right? You need people who are involved to talk about it. So you begin investigating the potential players, and if they committed other crimes having nothing to do with, you know, Trump-Russia collusion, that's still relevant because that gives Mueller leverage over these people. So in the case of Flynn and Paul Manafort, they seem to have legal jeopardy unrelated to Trump and Russia, but that's very relevant to whether they're going to be compelled to talk about what they know, if anything, about meetings they had, any potential collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And adding the son and other ancillary figures just plays right into that, Chris.
Well, we finished with you on a legal question. What do you make of the fact this lawyer for Flynn Sr., says no comment when he's asked if there's collusion? Well, that seems a pretty soft, undirected kind of response. Don't you usually say your client's innocent?
You do.
I was
really struck by that.
Point?
I agree with you. I was very struck by that. Everyone else in this investigation has flatly denied collusion with Russia. Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, the president himself. Mike Flynn's lawyer, when we asked him, said no comment. Now, he may just be being cautious. But, of course, the other, you know, if, in fact, his client was negotiating a cooperation agreement with the government, that would be another reason he would not want to directly contradict things that his client may be admitting. That's just speculation at this point. But that is one thing that crossed our minds when we saw that squishy no comment, as you put it.
I think it's pretty well. I didn't use the word squishy, but you did. But thank you. Thank you for that help. As I mentioned, NBC News also reports that the lawyer representing the former national security advisor himself, who's being scrutinized for his contacts with Russia, had no comment when asked whether any collusion took place. Quote, the elder Flynn's lawyer, Robert Kellner, declined to comment Tuesday when asked how his client responds to allegations of collusion with Russia. In fact, he used the words. His silence stands in stark contrast to what we've heard from other Trump associates as well as the president himself. For over a year now, it's been standard operating procedure for everyone in Trump's orbit to deny outwardly and conclusively any collusion with Russians to influence the election. Let's watch him in action.
So they're investigating something that never happened. There was no collusion between us and Russia. There is no collusion. You know why? Because I don't speak to Russians.
I did not collude with Russia, nor do I know of anyone else in the campaign who did so.
I would certainly say Don Jr. did not collude with anybody to influence the election.
So no collusion whatsoever between anybody involved with Trump and anybody involved with Russia in the 2016 campaign?
No.
Did any advisor or anybody in the Trump campaign have any contact with the Russians who were trying to meddle in the election?
Oh, of course not.
Paul, let's go back to this question of Russia and hacking. Can you tell us what you know about the relationship and what the campaign knows and what Donald Trump believes?
We have no relationship.
You know, I have to ask you, Senator, first of all, start with Senator. No, I'm sorry. We'll go with the Senator first. I'm sorry, Congresswoman. We'll give you in a minute. this whole mess, it just seems like it widens, it deepens. No comment. Flynn the older, Flynn the younger. They're all under investigation. I get the sense that Mueller is not going to stop with some narrow investigation. No. He's looking at any criminality. In fact, that is his mandate. Any criminality. He's going to squeeze whoever he finds guilty of something.
Robert Mueller is an exceptionally thoughtful, thorough, seasoned federal law enforcement leader. And if I were representing someone who were on the target list of his investigation, I'd be very concerned because I think he is going to persistently, patiently, and professionally keep at this, as you put it, starting at the outside and just squeezing and working his way in until he gets to his principal targets.
Second question. I mean, I don't want to play, what do you call it, nativist or chauvinist, meaning I only care about this country, although I care primarily about this country like most of us do. But there's something weird about this constant word Russia. Every freaking time we talk about any one of these people, the word Russia comes up. I mean, we now got Flynn involved with some deal with building Russian-built nuclear facilities in Saudi Arabia. It's like everybody Trump dealt with was entangled with Russia, from Manafort to Stone. Oh, my God, you keep going through the list.
It is a strikingly consistent pattern. How many of his core campaign team neglected to mention, forgot about, or overlooked
but we're in bed with
some
Russians.
Significant contact
Why
with
Russia?
It is odd because there's so many other countries in the world.
And it fits in with his love affair almost with Putin.
Yes.
You're smiling.
It's an unsettling and constant strain that has now gone on for 9 months, where the number of folks in his immediate family, in his core campaign circle, or who were in his initial cabinet had some inexplicable contact or relationship with Russians. Obviously, this is part of working from the outside in. The investigation's got, I think, quite a distance to go. But you're right, there is a truly unsettling, consistent pattern.
Congressman Speer, thank you. It's always great to have you on. I know you understand politics, and I love to talk about it. I do not understand why your committee majority has just signed on one of these gophers from the White House, who was the guy that led Nunes, your so-called leader, the chairman of your committee, on that midnight ride of Paul Revere down at the executive office building. And then he shows up the next morning with, guess what I learned? He learned it from the night before at the executive office building from the same Trump people. And now he's bringing aboard a Trump guy from the White House. Can't you guys just stand up and say, no, this isn't what we do here? We don't bring in gophers from the other side to defend them. We're investigating them.
So, Chris, the majority in the Intel Committee controls the Intel Committee. They get to decide who they hire. The minority also gets to decide who they hire. But we don't have any control over who is hired within the majority side.
You don't have any control?
No.
Okay, let me tell you something. Back in the old days when you were a child, I don't think you were born, in fact, Congressman. In fact, I know you weren't. When Joe McCarthy was writing at his worst, the Democrats on that committee, led by Scoop Jackson and some other good people, said, you know what? We're not putting up with Roy Cohn and that crowd running this committee anymore. They're totally irresponsible. They're terrible people. They're making accusations that have no foundation. They're McCarthyites. We insist on having our own counsel. And finally, they stopped going to meetings. And finally, they got Bobby Kennedy to be their counsel on the Democrat side. So why don't you go wild a little bit and say, we don't want to have people working for the defendant running our investigation of the defendant. Am I being too rough here?
There may come a time when we do that, but our intention is to work with our Republican colleagues on that committee to do this investigation and then come up with a report that we can both sign off on. And, you know, it has always been a bipartisan committee. It was regrettable once Chairman Nunes went on his, Paul Revere ride that we then became more partisan and when he had to recuse himself, sort of, from the committee and its investigation.
Let's talk. Are you going to try to get some of these more interesting characters like, Donald Trump Jr., people like that? Are you going to try to get them to testify in public so we can actually, like citizens actually get to watch them and decide if we believe them?
We've been calling on
I say that because people are implying that he isn't believable, that nobody really believes Donald Trump Jr. when he shows up, that he doesn't really have a credible face.
Well, we are calling for public hearings, and we would be delighted to have Junior actually appear in public. And in the end, the public does have a right to know. This has been an act of war by Russia. And it shouldn't be lost on any of us that they have used multiple platforms to undermine this democracy, whether it was RT, their TV stations, or Facebook, or hacking into our political institutions, the DNC and the Republican National Committee, or, furthermore, hacking into the very election system, both the voting records, and I'm not convinced that they didn't get into the machines. And that's where we've got to spend a lot of our time, I believe.
We don't know that yet. We don't know that. Let me go back to the senator. What's your position on subpoenaing people like Flynn, the senior Flynn, and maybe the junior Flynn, and also the question of bringing people who, Donald Trump Jr., for example, because I was getting the clear signal last week from senators that they didn't really believe him, and they'd like to put him in public so the public could share their incredulity.
Well, Senator Feinstein, the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, has said we will have Donald Trump Jr. In front of the Judiciary Committee giving sworn testimony, televised, so that we can ask direct questions and the general public can hear. She said, come hell or high water, she's going to get that done. And so far, Chairman Grassley, the Republican chairman, and the ranking member have worked very well together. They've come to agreement about who they subpoena, who they request voluntary meetings with, and over the August recess, the staff were very busy. They got more than 20,000 documents. I think there's a ways for us to go in our obstruction of justice investigation on the Judiciary Committee, but I do think we're making progress.
Do you think Dianne Feinstein should run for re-election?
Oh, I think Dianne Feinstein is sharper on her best days than I have ever been. So I'll tell you, there are moments when she is a remarkable, capable senator.
I'm with you. Let me ask you another question. Is your buddy Joe Biden running for president?
I don't know that yet.
Is.
I don't know that yet, but I'll tell you, I'd be thrilled if he were.
Okay, thank you. You'd be thrilled. Well, there's a story. Thank you, Senator Chris Coons, Congresswoman Jackie Spear, and Ken Delaney. And coming up, guess who's coming to dinner? Last night, red state Democrats spent the evening at the White House, and tonight, President Trump is hosting Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. What's the president's play here? Plus, the death toll is rising following Hurricane Irma.